Thank you, Lucy. It's really nice to see everyone. And if anyone has a picture of a horse in their background, please do cover it up very, very quickly for me. So what are we going to do in this session? We are really going to think about how to get you thinking about your future in a way that aligns to being future ready. How can we know what we're good at in a world where we don't know what's coming? I'm going to give you lots of things to think about. I'm going to give you lots of questions. This hopefully will be the start of the conversation for you rather than the end of the conversation. I'd love for you to join in the conversation, whether you're in a classroom or whether you are sat on your own. I'm going to give you some chance to take part in polls, but also put your questions in the chat box. And at the end, I'm going to leave some time for questions so you can come off mute if that works for you.
Claire, can I just pop in for a second and interrupt and just ask our students if they want to just leave their names and where they are joining us from in the chat box as you speak. Thank you.
No problem at all. If you're in a classroom, I would suggest rather than take part in the polls, because it's going to be very hard to get a concerted opinion, you can just have that conversation amongst yourselves. You will get the slides and you will get a recording of this, so don't worry about trying to write things frantically down. So let's start to think about what are we going to look at today. We're going to start to look at what we can intentionally do. Far too many of us leave things to chance. Far too many of us leave situations to just happen. And when you think about your career, do you want it to be something that evolves and you look back in 10, 15, 20 years time and think, how did I get here? Or do you want to drive your career? Do you want to be revolutionizing your career and making what you want happen? It's really easy to look at hugely successful people and wonder how they got there, or think about they must have things that I don't. In reality, what all the difference is they've put intentional action behind their plans, and that's what we're going to focus on. We need to do a couple of things in order to do this. We need to learn from what's gone before. No matter how old you are now, you've already begun to learn some lessons about what you like, what you don't like, who you are, who you aren't, and where you really, really enjoy spending your time. We also need to make sure that we're not so busy looking backwards or forwards that we forget about the here and now. Sometimes, particularly when we're young, we just want to think about what's next. When I get through this, I'm going to do X. My next step is this. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to do this. I'm going to work. We're so busy looking forward that we forget to maximize the things that we're learning today. And hopefully what I'll be showing you is how important building up a set of skills that you can transfer is. So I want you to think about, are you really maximizing the opportunities you've got today? When you're in the classroom, when you're taking part in activities, when you're doing all sorts of things, maybe even in the community as well as school, are you really maximizing that opportunity? Are you present? Are you fully taking advantage of the experience and then taking that understanding and banking it and using it? Or are you just going through the motions? The bad news is you're not ready for the future. In fact, you can't possibly be. Society is changing so rapidly. The way that we're working is changing so rapidly. Things like the pandemic, but also the wider technological changes and changing societal landscape means that you can't possibly predict what the future is going to be. As technology changes, it isn't going to take our jobs. It will change how we work with things. So we need to think about how we build relationships with technology rather than what technology does for us. And that means we need to constantly learn. There's no end to our learning. Everything is changing, and therefore if we're not learning, we're not keeping up. In your generation, you will have an average of 40 different jobs in about 7 different sectors. So whether that's law, whether that's technology, whether that's retail, you will move from sector to sector in a way that people never did before. So perhaps the views of your parents and your teachers of that linear career path, where you decided what you were doing very early on and then you moved through a very rigid route, perhaps that's not relevant anymore. As you can see on the screen, there 58 million work jobs will be available that currently don't exist. So you can't possibly be preparing specifically for those jobs because we don't know what they are yet. So instead, you need to build a bank of skills that are becoming increasingly important. As you can see at the bottom, increasingly employers are saying that they would prioritize people with essential skills over academic qualifications. Now, that doesn't mean, before you put your books away, it doesn't mean that academic qualifications aren't important. It means they're just not solely important. You need to have great academic qualifications, but you also need to have a set of transferable skills. So what are those skills? The first skill is thinking about the moves that we might make. As I said before, that linear career path, that rigid road that you've set out for yourself simply isn't relevant anymore. We have many opportunities to get to the same route. Think about your future like an underground map. You can go lots of different routes to get to the same place. So when you're thinking about what success looks like for you, think about going sideways. Think about going backwards. Think about going one step forward in one direction or another step forward in another direction. And be free and open for that set of almost what we call a jungle gym career approach. But we have to have a plan, otherwise we'll just drift. What I would always suggest is have a long-term plan about what success looks like for you, but set 18-month goals. In the next 18 months, what am I doing to take me 1 or 2 steps further forward? But I'm not setting out that rigid path that I can't move away from. So wherever you are now, whatever age you are now, you can have the next 18 months and plan what success would look like for that. And you can start to make actions that will get you there. We're going to unpick some of that in a second. One of the key skills you can have is agility, the ability to take something and adapt it, the ability to take some information and use it in a different context, the ability to change your approach to get the best outcome. We see 5 key elements of agility. We see self-awareness, understanding who we are. We see mental agility, the ability to think differently. We're solving increasingly complex problems, and therefore we need to be able to take our thinking and adapt it to different scenarios. People agility is becoming increasingly important. We live in a global world. Social media and technology means we're more connected than we ever were. You used to talk about 7 degrees of separation. There was about 7 links between you and any person. That's down to about 3 now. You can reach out to all sorts of people. You can be connected to all sorts of people. And increasingly, we're working with people from all over the world. You're probably seeing that in your schools as much as we are in society as well. So you need to be able to not just do what works for you, but adapt your style so that you're getting the best out of other people as well, and understanding that their needs aren't the same as yours, and understanding that their culture isn't the same as yours, and changing how you work in order to get the best out of everybody in the team. We need to cope with change. Change is the one constant that we have, and it's coming faster than ever. And we don't just want to survive change. Many of us feel like we've just survived the pandemic, or perhaps we're not even towards the end of it yet. We want to learn to embrace change and see change as an opportunity to grow. And lastly, we need to change what success looks like, because the measurements of success are changing all the time, and we need to be really well adapted to seeing success in all of its forms. But we need to start somewhere. So I'm going to give you some clues about where you could start. We know that some skills are becoming increasingly important and some skills are becoming less important. Like I said, not unimportant, just less important. So we can think about those skills that are growing in importance and think about, are we actively spending time building those skills? You can see them on the screen, but they pretty much break down into 4 key areas. Solving complex problems, managing yourself and making sure that you're fit and healthy and really your mindset is healthy, working with people, and using technology and developing technology. Now, I'm going to give you a poll now. And like I said, if you're in a classroom, you might just want to discuss for a few seconds in your groups. You can see the poll on the screen, hopefully. And the question I'm asking you is, which one of these 4 brackets do you feel like you would need to work more on? Which ones do you think, I'm not doing quite enough in there? Is it problem solving? Is it managing yourself and your emotions? Is it working with people? Is it technology? Do you think actually I'm doing all of those? Do you think I'm doing none of those? Or aren't you sure? I can see you're voting ready. That's a great thing already. By the way, if I say any words that you don't understand, although I'm sure your English is probably better than mine, do feel free to ask. Please don't just not know. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to vote. Okay, I'm going to close the voting now. And I'll share the results with you. So you can see it's a real mixture. Some people feel like they're doing okay, but that's only 3% of people. Some 4% of people feel like they could work on all of them. But nearly half of you feel like self-management is an area. Thankfully, we're going to unpick a little bit of that in this session. But whatever your results was for you personally, have a think about that and have a think about what 1 or 2 little things could I do to start developing that skill. The next thing we can think about is, what do you want to be known for? In a world where you can be anything, you can't do everything. So you need to think about, what do you want your story to be? What does success look like for you? And again, there's no answer to this because it's a very personal thing, but you should spend some time thinking about it. Because as you're developing experiences and as you're capturing things that will look on your CV or you will use as examples when you want to demonstrate your skills in things, you want to think about not just what is that experience, but what's it saying about me and my purpose. In a world that's ever changing and a world, as we've seen in the last 2 years, where uncertainty can come from nowhere, we need to have a bit of a compass. Otherwise, it's very hard to choose between one thing or another, one job and another job, one option and another option. But that compass can be your purpose. That moral compass that tells you what you want other people to say about you and what you want your legacy to be in the world. After the session, maybe spend some time talking together or just thinking on your own about what you would want your purpose to be. We're going to unpick a little bit of it now. We can start to think about the things that we really enjoy doing and where we thrive. And by thrive, I mean we do really well, we feel really happy, and we feel like we're making a difference. And we can look to Japan for this, something called Ikigai, which is a reason for being, a sense of our purpose. Now, I think very quickly when we're young, we're bought into a strategy of doing the things we're good at. We get to a place where sometimes we know what we're good at and we only ever stick to those things, and we stop doing other things, which of course means we never get better at them. But that's not your purpose. We need to combine a few other things for that. The first is to think about what you are good at. The second is to think about what you love doing. Now, you may love it and you may be good at it. You may love it, but at the moment you aren't good at it. That doesn't matter. Keep it in your list. Then you need to think about, what does the world need? How can I do something that makes the world a little bit of a better place than when I left? And that doesn't always mean you're doing something altruistic, or you're doing something caring, or you're doing something in terms of society. Bankers, lawyers, people who you wouldn't normally align with doing what the world needs, they have an important role in society and they make a difference. And lastly, because we are a practical human race, you need to think about, what can you survive doing? If you put all of those 4 elements together and you find that spot in the middle, it's where you're really going to thrive. Think about perhaps an activity you've undertaken recently. You might have been really good at it, and you might have got good reward for it, even if you haven't got paid for it. But you might not love it, and you might not see the reason for doing it. In that case, it just feels like a job. It just feels like a thing that you're doing. You might find something that you're really good at and that you absolutely love doing, but perhaps there's never going to be any money made in it, and perhaps you can't see the reason it needs. Therefore, it's just going to be a passion. Or sometimes you might find something that you love and that the world absolutely needs. Perhaps you're involved in activism, or you're involved in societal change. But if you can't get paid for that and you can't live off of that, it's just a mission and you won't be able to survive. So spend some time thinking about this after the session, thinking about, what would this look like for you, as much as you know right now, because this enables you to make decisions about things that you're not sure about. So you can look at, for example, a career and say, would I be good at that? Yes. Would I love it? Yes, possibly. Am I going to get paid for it well? No, probably not enough. So perhaps it's not that center spot. Always look for that center spot. But it's not just the what you do that matters. It's also the bigger picture of what you leave behind. We've gone through a society where people did things and made an impact and changed things, but actually left a trail of destruction behind them. And we know that's not success. So I want you to think not just about what you do, but how you do it and what it says about you. Our maximum impact is when we bring who we are and what matters to us, when we think about what we're doing, but we're also thinking about how we do it, and that is our impact. We impact people every single day. Every interaction that you have with people, you are leaving an impression on them. So make sure that impact is a positive one. People forget what you say very, very quickly, but they'll never forget how they made you feel. So think about that when you're interacting with each other. We've all got strengths and weaknesses, and we need to think about where we spend our time in terms of, are we developing our strengths, or are we just reinforcing situations? This is a model that can help us understand that. You can compare the activities you do by the level of challenge that they give you, and of course this is a very individual thing, and the level of skill that you already have in that situation. And depending on those graphs, depends on how it leaves us feeling. So if I ask you to do something that feels really challenging and you don't have any skill in that right now, it's going to give you a sense of anxiety. On the other hand, if I ask you to do something that is no challenge to you, but you equally have no interest in it and no skill in it, you're going to feel really apathetic about it. It's going to feel pointless to you. Far too often, I would say, we spend time in the relaxation space, where we already have a lot of skill because we're doing the things we've mastered or we're naturally very good at. And we don't develop it to keep challenging ourselves. We stay in our comfort zone of things we can easily do and we'll get rewarded for. Now, in the red zone, the anxiety zone, we know a lot about mental health and how stress and anxiety can create a lot of mental health issues for us. But did you know that staying in that relaxation and apathy zone where we're not challenging ourselves and we're not learning new things can also be just as damaging for our mental health. Where we like to spend our time is in this flow state, where we already have a set of skills, so we don't feel terrified, we don't feel overwhelmed, but we're continuing to push and we're continuing to challenge ourselves to take those skills one step further each time. We're taking ourselves out of our comfort zone and we're putting ourselves in situations where we may fail, but we have a sense that we have a core level of skill that we can draw from. When you're in that situation is when you're really, really thriving. You feel challenged, you feel capable, you feel it's exciting, you feel like you're achieving something. I'm sure all of you can think of a time when you felt like that. I want you now, again, to think about where you spend your time. I'm going to launch a poll again, but again, if you're in a class, you might just want to talk about it. If you think about your average day and your average week, where would you spend most of your time in here? Are you doing things that you already know how to do and are you sticking in your comfort zone? Or are you putting yourself in a situation where you're challenging yourself? Or perhaps you feel like you're not being challenged at all. I've launched the poll for you, so do get voting. It's a difficult question, I appreciate. I'll give you just a few more seconds to vote. And I am sure some of you are thinking, well, it's different on different days, but of course I'm trying to push you to think about the majority of your time as opposed to the range. Okay, I will end the poll just now and share the results. Now what we can see here is 24%, nearly double the other areas, say you're spending time in anxiety, where you feel like you have low skill but high challenge. But many of you are spending time in control, where you feel like you've got high skill but medium challenge. Wherever you are, it's about what we do with it that matters. So if you feel like you are in control, you're kind of challenging yourself, but maybe not as much as you could, think about what you could do to take that one step forward. Could you change something? Could you adapt that? Could you push yourself a bit forward? Could you ask for more challenge? Could you put your hand up for an opportunity that feels out of your comfort zone? If you're in that apathy box and perhaps you feel bored or worried, what could you do to increase your skill level and just recognize that that takes time and it takes progress? If you're in the anxiety state, then it's around how do we develop a toolkit of resilience, and we're going to talk about that. So you'll hopefully learn some steps to develop that. But think about, after this session, think about how much time do you spend in flow. Flow is where we grow. Flow is where we develop ourselves. Flow is where we reach beyond what we thought was possible. So try to take active steps to get yourself in that position. Of course, as well as strengths, we also have weaknesses. And we've developed a bit of a culture where we think it's not okay to have weaknesses, whether that comes from gender and things like toxic masculinity, or whether that comes from wanting to be seen by other people on social media and all of those things to have a perfect life. Sometimes we shy away from our weaknesses, but weaknesses are absolutely important. And getting to understand your weaknesses and what you do with them becomes really important. So I would invite you to separate out your weaknesses. Work on the ones that are holding you back from where you want to be right now. Have a plan for the ones that might hold you back in the future but aren't at the moment. And those things that you cannot control, perhaps it's your height or things that things that are happening in terms of society and government, and what's happening in terms of what you can and can't do, and all of those situations which you absolutely can't control at the moment, let go of them. I'll give you an example. I absolutely hate spreadsheets. I can love a project, but as soon as somebody brings a spreadsheet out, I get confused, I get panicky, and I just don't want to be part of the project anymore. Now, this is a weakness because I don't really understand them. But a while ago, I learned that I don't need to be perfect at everything. I need to work out what my skills are, and I need to be aware of my weaknesses and work with other people who have strengths in my weakness area. So I let go of feeling like I needed to be better at spreadsheets. And now when somebody has a spreadsheet, I go and ask somebody for support and they help me understand it. I don't need to do it myself. Think about what that might be like for you. What are your weaknesses? What are those things you feel like you should be better at? And then just ask yourself the question, do they impact me? And how am I going to address those things rather than be felt like you're held down by them? Or what are those things I can work on in the future and get comfortable with not being great at everything? My weakness is spreadsheets, so Excel and kind of graphs and that kind of stuff. Once we start to understand this about ourselves, we can develop what we call a sense of our best self, the environment where we're really doing well. But in order to do that, we need to look beyond ourselves because we're not very good at judging ourselves. Sometimes we're super harsh with ourselves, and sometimes we're too kind to ourselves. Other people see things that we don't do. So we need to be able to reflect back and develop that self-portrait of who we are and what our skills are. In order to do that, we need to get feedback from other people. So every opportunity you get, ask for feedback. It doesn't need to be a formal written thing. It doesn't need to be a serious conversation. Even asking people for what we call feed forward. So rather than asking something I just did was good or bad, asking them, what would you do differently? What would you advise me to do differently? So you're looking forward rather than back. That can take the emotion out of feedback. Once you've started to collect all that feedback and literally ask for it every time, every opportunity, and give it to each other. As a class, for example, if you created a really good informal feedback loop where you're telling each other what you love about each other, what you find, what you think other people could do differently, the skills that people have, the areas of development that people have. If you're doing that all of the time, you're going to get a lot of information. And the more information we have, the more we can start to recognize patterns. From those patterns, we can start to develop that sense of who am I and where do I really thrive? Do you like doing lots of different things at once? Or do you like to be able to focus deeply on one area at a time? Are you a really big picture thinker, or are you a really detailed thinker? Are you the person who loves to lead from the front and comes up with ideas really quickly? Or are you the person who likes to get everybody's support and get everyone's agreement and therefore lead a little bit from the back? That kind of information will help us understand where we will be at our best. And then when we're thinking about those jobs that come up in the future and those opportunities that come up, we can compare them to our best self. We also need to keep a mini timeline because things happen fast. Can you remember what this time last year was like? Can you remember the things you were doing and thinking and feeling? I know I can't. So sometimes we can be so busy looking forward that we forget to see what has helped us move backwards. So we can do a couple of things. I would always recommend at least every 3 months, you make a little timeline of something moving backwards. So you start to look at what's happened to me, what's influenced how I'm thinking, both in terms of my career and my job and my future. but also in terms of my views and how I feel about things and who I am as a person, because we're all evolving all of the time. And when we start to actually write that down on a piece of paper, and you can draw it, you can write it, you can do whatever works for you. When we look back, it can tell us a lot. Our best prediction of future behaviour is past behaviour. So we can start to see our patterns and our learning and start to make sure where we have learned something, we haven't just forgotten it and moved on, but we're actually really taking that learning and putting it into something in the future. How many times have you done the same mistake time and time again? And it's not because you want to, it's because we haven't got into the pattern of reflecting on what worked well, what didn't work so well, what do I need to learn from this that I can use going forward. We often think a lot about skill set in the future of work. What qualifications do I need? What technical ability will I need? But actually, I would argue that at your best, it's only 20% skill set and 80% mindset. You can have the best equipment and the best tools in the world, but if you don't know how to use them, and if you haven't got the mindset and the thinking that brings them to life, then that's a waste of time. So spend as much time on your mindset and your mental health as you are your technical skills and your academic studies. By that, I want to talk about resilience. And resilience is a word that has been really taken out of context, I would say. You hear people say all the time, well, that person's resilient, or that person doesn't have a set, isn't very resilient. I have to be more resilient. But let's think about what it actually is and how we can develop it. Resilience is not that you are some kind of superhero, like Wonder Woman here, where whatever life throws at you, it doesn't bother you, and you can just push it away and nothing affects you. That is not resilient. That is one of the most unhealthy mindsets to have. Those are the situations where we are at real risk of poor mental health. Instead, resilience means we're a spring. We can have setbacks and they can impact us, but we can bounce back. We can adapt well to change rather than just survive change. And when things aren't working, we can try different things. We don't just keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. We see that something's not working and we try something else in order to get where we are. If you're a geeky psychologist like me, it's called epistemic character. If you're not a geeky psychologist, you can think of it as the ability to flounder intelligently. Flounder is a very old English word that means kind of struggle. So struggle intelligently. The ability to know what to do when you don't know what to do. And you can think of it like a toolbox, a set of skills that sometimes you need one tool, and if that tool isn't working, then you need another tool. And the more tools you can develop, the more equipped you're going to be when situations come up that you aren't expecting. Before we talk about this, I just want to launch my third poll, which is your level of resilience at the moment. That concept of knowing how to bounce back and feeling like you have a set of tools when you feel overwhelmed. How resilient would you say you are? You can see you're voting really quickly. Thank you. And hopefully if you're in a classroom, you're having this conversation. Okay, here we go. I'm going to end the poll now. You can see 38% of people feel a little resilient, 24% people very resilient, and 24% people some but not much. and a few people not at all. And some people aren't sure, and that's absolutely fine. But we're going to think about how do we develop resilience, because it's a skill, it's a set of tools, it's like a muscle. The more you practice it, the better it gets. You've had a great opportunity this year. The level of change, the level of unexpected things to happen, the level of things being taken out of your control, things you hadn't considered possible. You've had a real great opportunity to start to develop those skills. As you move to the future of work and those jobs that haven't been created come up, and those situations and the change in society happens that we can't even predict yet, you are going to need resilience, because you can't be prepared. You can't have developed that skill already. So that toolbox becomes really, really important. We can develop resilience in 3 key ways. We can focus on our habits, our attitudes, and our responses. So let's start off with habits. How often do you actually learn from your experience? Do you actually unpick, what did I do that was working? What did I do that wasn't working? What helped me move forward? What held me back? When things go well, we want to celebrate them and we want to really kind of ride on that wave. When things don't go well, we want to just get through that as quickly as possible and not talk about it again. But spending some time, whether it's the end of every class, whether it's the end of every week, whether it's the end of every month, whatever it is for you, just thinking to yourself, what did I learn from that? What worked well that I should keep doing? What didn't work well that I should stop doing? You can start to build up a bank of tools. You have to make sure you're giving yourself permission to do the things that you love. We have things that we call radiators, things that give us energy, things that give us confidence. They're often things like going and spending time with friends, taking part in exercise, reading, playing music, all sorts of things, very different for very different people. And there are things that we call derailers, things that, like a Hoover, suck the energy out of us and suck the confidence out of us. They're often things like other people do to us. So perhaps somebody questions you, or perhaps you feel unprepared, or perhaps you feel like people don't trust you. They're often less things about us and more things about other people. I'd love you after this session, or perhaps even as a group, to write down the things that give you confidence and energy and the things that take your confidence and energy away. But you know what? When we feel overwhelmed and we feel low in resilience, we tend to stop doing the things that give us energy and confidence first. How often have you said, I've got my schoolwork to do, I'm behind and I don't know how to do this task, so I just need to sit here longer and I just need to stay here until I've got it done. Actually, if you went and spent half an hour doing something that gives you confidence and energy, you're much more likely to be able to complete that task to a higher level when you come back. So give yourself permission to build into your schedule the things that give you confidence and energy. We also need to make sure we have a good support network around us. Think of yourself like the top of a triangle. Underneath you are people who you rely on and you can lean on. When you're not feeling so confident, they're going to boost your confidence. When you feel stuck, they're the people that you can ask questions of without worrying about how they'll think about you. They're the people that you can tell things to. When we've got that network, we can be much more resilient. But we can't build that network when we need it. So make sure you're building it all of the time and you're appreciating those people who are in your triangle. And when you feel your resilience is low, you're leaning in on them. Of course, you're also in somebody else's triangle. So make sure that if you're supporting somebody else and they feel like they're struggling, you're reaching out for them. You're not waiting for them to reach to you, but you're reaching out to them and you're asking how you can support. Then we come to attitudes. How we see something is a lot of what we end up experiencing. How many times have you come into school thinking today's going to be an awful day? And of course it always is, because you're seeing everything through that lens. So we can teach ourselves to be optimistic. We can see the positives in things. We can control the things that we can control, and we can let go of the things that we can't. And we can see the discomfort that we often experience when we're a little bit unsure or we're having to be more agile. We can see that as an opportunity to grow rather than focus on the discomfort. And the last element is our response. Whenever things happen, though, there is something that happens, the event, and there's our response to it. And those two things together make the outcome. We often forget about that. We focus on what something else is happening or why someone's doing X, Y, or Z. And we forget that we choose our response. But we need to learn to respond and not react. And that means just stopping and thinking and choosing our response before we start. I know for me, for example, when I feel overwhelmed and stressed, I write a list. I very rarely do anything that's written on the list. But I know for me that sitting and writing the list calms me down enough to be able to open my resilience toolbox and start to do the things that I know help me move forward. We can also get used to asking for help. Very few people find asking for help easy. It's a very small word. It feels very big. But if you ask for help all of the time, not only do you always get support and learn things that you wouldn't otherwise have known, but when you do need it, it feels less scary to ask. So get used to asking for help in terms of with your friends. I'm missing something here. What do you think about this? How would you do this? What do you think I should do? Get used to asking for help in the classroom. Is there anything else I've missed? Could I do something better? Could you help me understand? And get used to asking for help at home. Can we do this together? I've probably missed something. Can you help me understand a situation? Once we start to do that, we start to really build our resilience. After the session, it'd be great for you to think about which ones of these are you good at? Which ones of these could you work on? Unfortunately, for most of us, we don't learn resilience until what we would normally do isn't working. But when we start to use resilience, we realize that there's huge benefits to it. The more we use it, the more we realize it's valuable. So take that first initial step and start to put some of these things into place. We also need to stop our unhealthy thinking. We all have a voice in our head. We all have a little voice that's telling us things all the time. And sometimes that voice that should be our best cheerleader can be our worst enemy. So we can start to recognize patterns of thinking and how we can break the cycle that means they become unhealthy. This is a good example. I did a presentation this morning that didn't go so well. It was a difficult situation. I took from that situation, I'm no good at presentations. Rather than see it as there were some things out of my control, there were things I could have done better, I let it go to my beliefs. I took the adversity and I let it go to my beliefs. That one bad presentation, forgetting the 10 that have gone well, becomes important and becomes, I'm not good at presentations. Of course, that means next time I'm going to do a presentation, I'm super worried. I'm super stressed about it. I'm super anxious because that voice inside my head is saying, Claire, you're no good at presentations. So I'm much less likely to do well because I'm already anxious before I even start. Think about what that looks like for you. Where can you think of an example where something's not gone how you wanted it to, and then you've let it go into your beliefs, and then it's created consequences which reinforce your beliefs? So when that does happen, unpick the adversity. Nothing went really well or really badly. There's always good bits and there's always things that could be better in any situation. And make sure it doesn't go into your beliefs. When you hear your voice say, I'm not any good at that, hear it, acknowledge it, and rewrite it. What would you say to somebody else if they said that? And you can start to rewrite that script inside your head to become something more positive. Here are some top tips for doing that. Whenever you hear yourself being unkind to yourself, stop and replace it with a positive. It doesn't mean you're walking around your bedroom going, I am awesome. It doesn't mean you're being arrogant or unrealistic. It means you're just allowing yourself to be kind. Stop expecting more of yourself than other people expect. You don't expect to be perfect. We're all clumsily human. So enable yourself to be good enough for any situation. Many of us are scared of failing and scared of admitting that we want something if we might fail. Others of us are equally as scared of succeeding. So when you've done something well, get comfortable with sharing that with people and celebrating it with people. And the last thing, I think the most important thing, is to stop trying to be what everybody else wants you to be. You can only be yourself. Everybody else is taken. So make sure you're being yourself and you're developing yourself in a way that takes on feedback from other people, but ultimately feels that you're in control. I've left you some top tips, but I'm not going to talk about them in any big way because I wanted to leave some time to hear your views and to hear any questions that you might have. My last point is to remember that leadership isn't about a position. When you're thinking about what success looks like for you in the future, and you're aspiring to leadership or a big success story, remember that leadership isn't about the role, it's a set of behaviors. And it's actually a responsibility to do better for others. Also, great leadership means that legacy that you've left goes on without you. So it isn't centered around you, it's empowering everybody else to be their best. I'm going to leave you with one very last question. Given that the future is uncertain, given that you can't be ready, but you can build a set of skills to help you be as ready as possible and to embrace the uncertainty. This is a question I think we should ask ourselves all of the time. What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And then start to think about what little step could I take in order to get me one step closer to that one thing. I'm going to stop now and give you some time to hear your views and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very, very much, Claire. That was lovely. That was lovely. So let's see, I've been looking at the chat box and I haven't seen any questions. So let's see if people would like to either unmute themselves or write a question or a comment on the chat box. So Claire can talk us through it or give us some more ideas and answers. For myself, oh, good. Yes.
Sorry. I have a question. It's about myself in part. Well, I try to do, like you said before, that stop studying and make something that makes you happy or something that is relaxing for you. Where I tried sometimes, I like drawing, is something that I used to study, but when I draw, I spend so much time drawing that I forgot that I have to study. So then when I realized, wait, I have to study, I have like, it's time to eat, and then after it I have to sleep, so I don't have time. What I have to do.
That's a brilliant example. And what that shows is two things, actually. One is you've obviously found the thing that is really close to your purpose, because when we feel like we're in flow, we actually lose sense of time and we lose sense of things, and what can an hour can feel like a minute. So congratulations for finding the thing that you can get lost in. But when we're giving ourselves permission to do the things, what we have to do is be a little bit boundaried on that. Give yourself a timeline. If you find that drawing is something that you lose hours in, maybe think about the next best thing, or give yourself an hour of drawing as a reward for doing something else, and set your alarm, and then make sure you're quite boundaried in. Once you've done it for an hour, come back to your study.
Thank you. I will try it today.
Marcela Raceto commented as well, the idea of giving ourselves permission to do things we love.
Yeah, it sounds silly because we think that if I just sit here and do it longer, our brains have a very limited attention span. So actually what we call cluster thinking, so spending half an hour on something and then going away from it and then coming back to it, is the most effective way of learning.
Sorry, and as you explained, it's great if we could just build permission into our schedules, right? So as to help it become a habit.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing it, but in the back of your mind is, I haven't really got time for this, how am I going to do these other things? You're never going to relax. So you need to, when you're drawing your plan, it's really helpful to block those times out and don't let them be taken up by something else, but know that they're in your plan alongside everything else that you're doing.
Thank you.
Carolina, would you like to tell us a little bit about that, your comment?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So for my comment is that the key point is to be positive and believe in yourself and aim for the sky.
Thank you, Chris. You should be here delivering this instead, because you've understood perfectly. When we say be positive, the one thing I would say is don't turn be positive into I can never be worried, or I can never be doubtful, or I can never be sad. If we're always trying to be positive, we've got to allow ourselves a range of emotions. We all get nervous sometimes. We all doubt our ability. We all feel scared and sad. Allow that emotion, feel that emotion, and then work with that emotion to try and reframe it to a positive, rather than pretend you don't feel it.
Okay.
But thank you, Chris. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. Okay, so one thing I want to ask is, I'm actually from Trinidad and the pandemic is out of control. So everybody must take necessary precautions, because here in my country, the pandemic is really out of control.
Yeah, and it can feel a really scary time because, the pandemic is in different stages around the world, but even within one country, we're all experiencing the pandemic very differently. There's a great saying that says we're in the same sea, but we're not in the same boat. So some people will enjoy spending time at home. Some people will find that hard. Some people will have, thankfully, not experienced, people being ill. Other people may have experienced people being ill. We're all experiencing the same situation very differently. The one thing we can do is work out what's out of our control. There's no point worrying about, can I go to school? Do I have to stay at home? Why is that? When is it going to change? Those things will happen outside of you. They're outside of your control. What you can do is say, okay, so if I have to spend time at home, what am I going to do to maximize that time? There are great opportunities in terms of lockdown. So for example, Loads of museums have put their tours online. Loads of speeches and shows and talks and things have gone online. So you have access to things that you never had before the pandemic. So maximize the ability whilst recognizing it can still be a bit rubbish sometimes, and think about your role in supporting other people as well. If you're finding it quite easy and your friend says to you, I find it really hard, even if it's not your feeling, recognize that that's how they feel and help them with that rather than dismiss it.
So basically, the only thing I have access to before the pandemic is that I go to most of the events, but with this pandemic, I have to do everything online. So like I have to attend the events online, and I have to do school online. But however, since I'm in my house, so what am I gonna do? But we can't go outside now because we're now facing this out of control pandemic. So we have to stay at home. So what are we gonna do when we're staying at home? You can I joined the events online.
Yeah, exactly. And what about those things that you've always wished you wanted to do? Whether it's learn a language, whether it's learn a skill. Now you've got lots of time. So that's a great opportunity to use that time effectively rather than see it as stopping you doing something else.
Claire, Chris, you know, it's been great to listen to your concerns, and we really hear how difficult it is for you in Trinidad. It's difficult in many places. We hear there's possibly lots of people there for you, and we're here for you as well.
Okay.
So thank you for your participation. And Claire, we need to stop our time.